We've never seen a moose before, and we really wanted to, which is why when we saw that you could take a moose safari at Moosehead Lake, we booked it immediately. This past weekend, we went up to Moosehead Lake, which is a popular tourist destination in northern Maine, and it's also the largest lake in the state. Immediately when you enter the town, you get this just grand view of the lake and the town and all the islands peppered throughout and the mountains in the background. It's pretty breathtaking. Now, coming from Michigan, of course, we have pretty high expectations for lakes. Now, of course, it's nowhere near the size of Lake Michigan or even Lake St. Clair, but it more than makes up for that in character, which we got to really see firsthand when we did a boat tour around the lake the next day. The tour took us around the lake for a few hours aboard this old steamboat that they had restored called the Kate. And while we were on there, actually, the first mate, Ray or Roy, not totally sure, kind of took a liking to us and made a point to come talk to us a couple times, and then actually came and grabbed us and asked if we wanted to take a tour of the engine and go below deck. Like I said, everywhere you looked on the tour, you could just always see something spectacular. We saw the Boundary Mountains, which are the mountains that border Canada to the north. We also saw a tiny bit of the peak of Mount Katahdin, which is the largest mountain in the state. And we also saw Mount Kineo, which is a small mountain on an island in the lake that has a 700-foot just sheer cliffside that drops off right into the lake. And we actually went there the following day and just kind of did a short hike around the island.
I'm not sure I took the most graceful way.
That's okay.
Okay. There's water pouring on me. Oh,
Yep.
But none of that is the point of this video. The point is the moose safari. And honestly, that was kind of the point of this whole trip anyway. We really have wanted to see a moose. We've been living in Maine a few months. We didn't see any last year when we came here. We haven't seen any so far. And the moose safari was the last thing that we were doing on the trip. And by the time we got to the outfitters for the safari, we still hadn't seen one.
That is really good.
Exactly. Hi there, how are you guys?
Good.
Good. We have a tour at 4.
And the name on that?
Lexi Wing.
So you guys are all set. You guys just want to wander around. Brandon is helping us with something right now, but we'll let him know that you're here. Okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Perfect.
We signed in and very impatiently waited for our guide, Brandon. After a while of nervous excitement and just waiting around the store, we were finally off. Brandon took us out of town and deep into the woods. And this is when he told us the plan for the evening.
We're gonna go get in a canoe in the middle of the Maine woods in a remote pond. My job is to try to get to where the moose like to be, and hopefully they're home.
All right.
There's always a chance we see nothing. This morning was beautiful weather. I was expecting to see more than we did, and we only saw one on the way in, on the main road. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but then sometimes they make me look like I know what I'm talking about. So,
Great.
I've seen 9 on a trip, and I've seen 0, so it's all in between. And one day, 0 was one day, and the very next day I saw 9.
That's crazy.
Right? So it's just like, it's not really us. It's all luck.
He also told us that the tour began the minute that we left town, so keep our eyes open. Apparently these back roads were just as good a place to see moose as anywhere else, and that they're very elusive and very quick, so we had to have our eyes and camera just at the ready at all times.
We'll be happy with whatever we see. So.
Successful trip would be one, but I don't like to stop there, and if for some reason we don't see anything, which today's not a very hot day, I like our chances this evening.
We made made it to the lake without a sighting, which was to be expected. And we got the canoe out and off the shore. I got to ride in the princess seat, as they call it, which is the middle seat, which is the person who doesn't have to paddle, because I had to have my hands ready to take video, of course. Right away when we got on the lake, we saw a pair of loons, which we had only seen a couple times. Recently on our trip to Rangeley, we saw them very briefly from the jet skis, and then again actually aboard the Kate on our tour of the lake the day before, we had seen a couple from the boat, but those were pretty far away, and this was definitely the best view that we've ever had of them. So Brandon said he tried to get us a little closer, but they are pretty skittish, so we were just kind of trying to sneak up on them a little bit. We were making our way across the pond, slowly chasing down these loons, when Brandon very abruptly changed directions and just loudly whispered, "Moose." It was actually happening. Lex and I were both silently freaking out, but we couldn't make any noise because we didn't want to scare the animal, so we just kept our composure as we just hauled ass across this lake. We all just kept our eyes trained on it, and we were really hoping that it wouldn't leave before we could get close to it. I couldn't really see it from where I was at, so I kept trying to use my camera to get a view of it, but I couldn't really see it in the viewfinder. The footage, you can see it pretty clearly, but it makes it look a lot closer than it was. I could not see anything. After what felt like an eternity, we had finally made it to the far shore, and right in front of us was a moose. We sat there just watching her eat the duckweed, taking our videos and pictures, and just appreciating this moment for at least a good 20 minutes before we finally decided that we had seen enough somehow and continued our tour around the lake. Evidently, it's pretty rare to get to choose to leave a moose sighting. Usually it's pretty brief and they move on before you want to. So being able to sit there for so long and just take it in was, we got so lucky. We were finally allowed a moment to really appreciate and take in where we were. You know, we were sitting in a canoe in a remote pond in the backwoods of Maine, surrounded by mountains. Which Brandon pointed out, the mountains to the east of us were actually part of the Appalachian Trail. It's known as the 100-mile wilderness. It's either the beginning or the end of the trail, depending on where you start. And it's widely accepted as the most rural and rigorous part of the journey. As we continued around the lake, we saw some pitcher plants, which are a carnivorous little red plant that's kind of similar to Venus flytraps, but don't have the movement. They just kind of sit there. That was really cool to see. And that was on a little island within the lake. And then as we got around that island, we saw the loons again. They were pretty much directly between us and where we were headed to on the shore, so we kind of just calmly kept our path and just hoped that they would pop back up near us. Brandon was just telling us about this thing that loons do where they kind of shake their whole body and their feathers as a way of stretching and cleaning themselves off. And right as he was explaining that, one popped up pretty close to us. And immediately, it did that. So having seen pretty much everything that we wanted to just on our first stop, we were totally content. So the pressure was off for the rest of the trip. So we were really just there to enjoy whatever happened next. So we kept going deeper into the wilderness, and we saw some really cool animals along the way. We saw a beaver bog, and we actually at one point saw moose tracks in the road, which we got out, and Brandon explained that they were the tracks of a mother and a calf that he has seen there a few times. We carried on, and he told us a bunch of stories about the area, his favorite spots in Maine, and also about this place called Lazy Tom's Bog, which is a clearing that I guess has gotten pretty popular after a New York blogger saw it and posted about it, and now it's one of the very few like popular spots back in the woods. So just to preface this, in the few hours that we have been on this tour, we've seen maybe 3 cars on these back roads. I mean, they're back logging roads. They're not really meant for normal vehicles. When we pulled up to Lazy Tom's Bog, there were at least 6 other vehicles there. And it's not a big opening. Exactly as he had predicted, the place was popping. But it turns out, that's because there was a moose there. We got out of the van to get a better look, and immediately it was like walking into a painting. The mountains, the water, the moose, the sunset, everything just lined up perfectly. Again, we watched him for a good 10 to 15 minutes and agreed to move on. Brandon was beside himself at this point, because as he said earlier, it's very rare that you get to choose to leave a moose sighting, let alone twice in the same day. We carried on with the tour for a little while.
Taking out of the Maine woods has to be tagged, so you have to bring it to a station. There's officials there, there's biologists there.
And eventually we kind of looped back around to Lazy Tom's Bog, and sure enough, the moose was still there. The sun was a bit lower. Plenty of people were still watching him. And we got out to finally see the moose kind of cross the stream and head back into the woods. When we got back in the van this time, I think it really hit us what all we had seen tonight. We had 2 incredible moose sightings. We couldn't have asked for anything more. Lex and I were getting pretty excited. Brandon was just kind of telling us some personal stories, and we were looking back at some footage on the camera of everything that we had gotten tonight. While we were looking down, apparently the car in front of us had hit their brakes pretty hard, so Brandon kind of swerved and then hit his brakes as well. And we looked up and we realized why the person had stopped. And it's because there were 2 more moose in the road. It was the mother and the calf whose tracks we had seen earlier. They were just walking down the road straight towards us. By the time I had looked down, grabbed my camera, turned it on, and looked back up, they were gone. They had just disappeared right into the woods. I think there were just too many cars out watching them, but that's okay. That one was just for us. And it was a pretty incredible sighting to round out the night. We saw 4 moose, 2 loons, and a turkey, and a bunch of other stuff. Apparently among the guides, there's something called the Grand Slam, which is when you see a moose, a loon, a turkey, and a bear all in one trip. Now, we never did get to see the bear, which I'm totally fine with. But everything else we saw, and hey, 3 out of 4 isn't too bad.
Take me back to that mountain road, the one that led to the swimming pool. The fish I caught with my line and pole, I let 'em go, I let 'em go.